Welcome to our second run of the Hear From Her series, where we speak with outstanding women leaders and achievers in Singapore. So, this is the first episode of the second series, and we are very excited to have with us today Susannah, an entrepreneur who is the founder of Zerrin, that is an online marketplace that carries sustainable and ethically conscious fashion. So, Susannah is also the host of the Made Better podcast, where she connects with other incredible and inspiring individuals to speak about how to create and consume more consciously. Thank you, Susannah, again for being here. So maybe we can start with a little sharing about your personal journey in fashion, your brand, and how you developed a passion for sustainability.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here on the podcast. My name's Susannah. I'm the founder of Zerrin. I'm actually a former magazine editor turned entrepreneur, so I haven't always run my own business. I actually moved to Singapore in 2012 and worked my way up through the media industry, first in PR and then magazines, from writer to editor to creative director roles before founding this company in 2018. And as a backgrounder, I come from the UK, so grew up very much so with what's called the Great British High Street of brands. So big fast fashion brands and a very fast-paced media cycle. Like back when I was growing up, literally magazines would have pages and pages of what's in the shops to shop now that week. There wasn't just monthly magazines, there was weekly magazines. So everything was so synced up and it was a huge consumer and fast-paced consumer market. And I grew up with the boom of the big online destinations like ASOS and boohoo.com. So I come from there. I was your typical fast fashion consumer So while writing about fashion, clothes, trends in my job, I think that working professionally on fashion gives it this whole different dimension. And I came to analyze things in a different way. The whole cycle of trends, spring, summer, autumn, winter, shows, events, over time started to feel a little less meaningful. And I'd always felt kind of like a little bit of an outsider in how I perceived things, as I never came to the industry or my job because of the glitz or glamour or free things, PR gifts. Where I came from was I really enjoyed the act of writing and telling stories and sharing things that made people think or helped people. And I was kind of coming at that through the lens of a fashion and beauty editor. I wrote about beauty as well. So over time, over years in my job and the cycle of everything, I started to feel like everything I was doing felt a bit less meaningful than I wanted it to. And at the same time, in the market, you either had, specifically here in Singapore as well, blog shops, fast fashion, or on the other end, you have luxury brands. And I was sort of in my mid-20s, kind of falling out of love with the poor quality of fast fashion and had never been like a big luxury consumer because number one, I couldn't afford it. And number two, I'd never associated such brands with like huge prestige. I think when you're working in the industry, everything feels a little bit different than if you're just coming at things from an average consumer and you can see a little bit more about behind the scenes and how things really work. So yeah, I kind of felt like a bit of an outsider at the same time. That's my bit of my personal journey, which then led up to me launching Zerrin, which really was a case of me discovering this whole array of really cool, up and coming, emerging brands that created things in a more connected way. They were more connected to their supply chains, how they made their products, where they came from, how they were sourcing. And that whole narrative and like speaking with and learning from how these brands did things opened up a whole different way of producing, consuming, and engaging with fashion and consumer goods for me. And I realized that positive impact, whether it was socially or environmentally, that whole learning for me led me down the road of understanding more about what sustainability actually was, researching, learning about the impact of the industry that I had been so heavily involved in and perpetuating it in many ways in my role as an editor, because we're writing about things to encourage people to consume more. I felt far more inspired by these brands who were doing things differently, creating at a slower pace, but creating better quality products that married style, sustainability, and social responsibility. And I realized that actually this is what I thought was the future, because ultimately we need better design to help create a better world. And that's what I've realized even more so over the last 5 years of running this company. And that's how the idea of Zerrin came about, because at the same time, these brands are creating amazing products, but they struggled with brand awareness, aligned sales channels, just marketing themselves. And that's what sparked the idea behind our platform, which started off as a small curated marketplace to discover high quality and design-led sustainable brands. And we started with 14 brands. We now have worked with, over the last 5 years, about 70 brands spanning Southeast Asia. But we're so much more than a marketplace. We also curate content. We're a very content-led destinations. You can find tips, resources to inspire your conscious buying journey and help you shop better. And we're also a community and ecosystem enabler for SMEs. We help mentor and work with a lot of brands on a B2B level to help grow them better from the inside out. So we have this whole multi-pronged business model that we've created now from Zerrin, all with the goal of helping inspire the industry and the average consumer to consume and create more consciously.
Thanks for sharing your journey. I think it's really incredible that you were very aware of such issues early on and decided to take action on this in a more meaningful way through some of the industry insights that you gained from your past experiences. And it's also great to hear that your brand is also more than a marketplace and also a community. You bring together independent and ethical designers. So how does Zerrin ensure the quality of brands you bring onto the platform, for instance, the transparency of production lines and so on?
Yes. So number one, I want to preface this by saying that when it comes to sustainability and the kind of concept of what sustainable fashion is, there is no such thing as a perfectly sustainable product. No matter what certifications, no matter how things are produced in, the best way with the best fabrics, with the everything in place. The most sustainable product is one that does not necessarily exist or hasn't been created, but we're working in an industry in which new products are created every day across industries. So if we're going to create new things, we need to create them in a better way. And that is what most of the brands that all of the brands that we work with on the platform represent, that ethos. So number one, we have a framework that we actually implemented at the start just for our own reference, which is called the Better Brand Framework. And we look at 5 different areas of a brand's practices before onboarding them onto the platform. So number one, we look at product. We look at how their product is created and using what fabrics, what materials, how they are sourcing, the actual quality of the design, because while we are about sustainability, we're also about very good design, and we want to curate the best products and the most original pieces that excite people and celebrate all the creativity that the fashion industry is known for and that the consumer goods industry is known for. So we look at product, we look at people, people meaning how they treat labor within their organization. Are the production houses / factories / sourcing areas where they get fabrics or ingredients, are these people paid living wages? Do the factories have any specific auditing practices or specific certifications? So we look and ask for this information. And obviously that living wage is determined by actually what it costs to live a decent quality of life in the respective country, whatever country production that is. There's also a minimum wage, but minimum wages are often not 100% reflective of what it really costs to live decent quality of life. So we look at living wages rather than minimum wages. So then planet. Again, we look a bit deeper into fabrics, what choices they're making there. Are they using natural or synthetic fabrics? Synthetic fabrics are largely made from plastics, so fossil fuels. So exactly like, plastic bottles that are floating around in the ocean or polluting our beaches. There's actually about 500,000 tons of microfibers that are leached into our waterways and oceans every year just from washing plastic clothes. So as a policy, we don't carry any virgin synthetic products on our platform. This is typically what a lot of fast fashion products are made from, but equally, there are a lot of luxury brands that use synthetic fabrics too. And synthetic fabrics, sometimes we need them for like swimwear and sportswear. So for us in the activewear segment, we work with brands that are only using recycled versions of synthetic fabrics. We also then, under Planet, we look at they are managing waste, how they're designing out waste and approaching circularity in their business model. So there's that as well. So there's product, people, planet, principles. We look at the overall vision of the brand. what they want to achieve, where they want to go, their plans, so we can look at how we can help them grow and grow with them. And I also find that we need better people to create better brands. So we really work closely with founders and we really want to get to know them to understand their goals. And if they have a great moral compass and a good way of working together. And the last one, packaging. Even though it's not necessarily important sometimes because we have our own eco-friendly packaging at Zerrin that we ship products out in, it's important for us to understand how brands are approaching packaging in general, whether it's the way that products are coming from their manufacturers to them and then how they're shipping them out to customers. We try and encourage all of our brands to use recycled or biodegradable or compostable packaging. We've had a zero plastic policy at Zerrin since we started in 2018 in terms of the packaging we've sent out. We've never sent anything out in plastic to our Singapore customers or even to our Hong Kong and Malaysia-based customers. So we found a way to get around that, and we encourage brands to do so too. That being said, when I started sharing, we take every brand case by case because not all brands have the resources or connections to get everything right or as well as it could be. Perhaps they are finding trouble sourcing a certain fabric or sourcing a certain packaging, and then we can maybe help connect them with someone who can do better for their next product range or collection. But we're looking at a basic minimum of a decent amount of progress made in all of those 5 areas. And of course, then on top of that, if a brand says that they have certain certifications, whether it's for a beauty ingredient in terms of a formulation or whether it's a specific fabric, we'll ask to see those to verify. Because we have actually had customers ask us in the past, do you have proof of this certification? Not many, but we have had people who ask that. So it's important to us that we are actually really verifying that too.
Thanks for explaining the very holistic framework. And it's great to hear that Zerrin has this in place to ensure sustainability of the brands, while at the same time being realistic that there is no perfectly sustainable item. So an increasing number of fast fashion brands also intend to be more sustainable and are pushing out sustainable fashion lines. So what are your views on this, and how do you think big brands can champion sustainability in the right way?
It's a big topic. I mean, firstly, the creation of any garment creates an impact. So kind of like I shared before, whatever we do, whether it's a fast fashion brand, a sustainable brand, that is really starting with that ethos from the get-go, or a big luxury fashion house that has, this legacy of years and decades worth of production, the creation of any garment creates an impact. It's not just a binary case of fast fashion is bad, luxury products are better. Because what often happens is that sustainable brands, because they are more of a mid-tier price point, they get lumped into the too expensive or why is this expensive area, whereas people don't question why luxury products cost what they do. Do you know what I mean? Because people say, oh, it's X brand name, of course it costs that much because it's that brand. When actually what you don't see is the fact that a lot of the big brands have actually had a lot of labor exploitation issues, a huge amount of lack of transparency within their supply chains. So that's important to know that it's not that binary and not just fast fashion that's the problem. So I think that any brand, big or small, really needs to set an intention of how they want to grow moving forward, because fashion is inextricably tied to climate change, from its impact on carbon emissions, plastic pollution, labor exploitation, wastewater and industrial pollution. All of this is inextricably tied to the climate crisis. So there's no denying that. There's scientific evidence, scientific proof, and now years and years worth of bodies of research for this. It's getting to a crux point that brands can't ignore it anymore, and the industry can't ignore it, which is why sustainability has become such a buzzword in the last 5 to 10 years. Increasingly, I'd say the last 3 years even. And I think, number one, it's really being honest about where they're at in terms of they're producing. There are a lot of brands that produce, you've shared, sustainable lines, which may just be a one-off in comparison to the rest of their production and where they derive the majority of their revenues, which is more unsustainably made product. Some consumers, and for a lot of consumers really, who are now far more savvy because of how increasingly connected we are and how readily available information is, it can seem disingenuous and actually backfire. And it has backfired on a lot of brands who've created sustainable or conscious collections, again, fast fashion or luxury. And then it seemed as, well, what are you going to do now? Or it seemed hypocritical. I think that there needs to be bigger strides and bigger commitments and more sharing and more transparency behind their plans and what they're doing, because nowadays consumers are demanding that information. So it can't just be one collection anymore. And I think that is changing. There are much bigger commitments from fast fashion brands now, from many different big groups. There are a lot of bigger commitments from offsetting emissions by 2025 or 2030. They're setting their own internal targets, fabric changes across the board. But it's the tough thing when it comes to the world's biggest legacy brands is that with the idea of year-on-year growth and that growth beyond everything, which is, I guess, capitalism in some ways, but which can't be helped. But it means that they are incentivized to keep producing at this pace that they are. And really, the world has too much stuff as it is. It's this natural tension that a lot of people point out and feel like it can never be really resolved. Like as a fast fashion brand, producing the scale and the amount of products that you have, it's never be sustainable, given what the world needs and what we need to do to mitigate the climate crisis. We should be moving towards greater transparency, really making all collections as sustainable as possible in terms of fabric, paying living wages, because a lot of the world's biggest fast fashion brands are notorious for not paying workers what they should be, and their supply chains, it's always bottom of the supply chain that gets squeezed. And there is a lot of evidence of this. You can look up the Rana Plaza collapse, which was a big eye-opener for the fashion industry in regards to this. Making fewer but better products. Again, it doesn't really go with the business model, but I think that's really what the world is moving towards. We need to create fewer things, but better. And I don't know what that really looks like for the future of fast fashion. It lends itself better to luxury brands and the narrative that they already have, and also the price point that they currently command from consumers, what people are willing to pay. But it puts fast fashion in a bit of a conundrum. So I've seen a lot of brands go into like secondhand. Also, we've seen big brands do trial rental, trial resale as well. So different ways to diversify their business model away from just selling as many cheap goods as possible. There's a few ways they can champion sustainability. I think it needs to really be a more concerted effort over the next couple of years to achieve what we need to achieve.
Thanks. I think those are really great perspectives on what brands, whether big or small, can do in their sustainability journey, and also be honest about their starting point and where to go from here. So looking forward into the future, what do you think is the future of fashion, and how sustainable do you think it can realistically be?
Like I said, I think the industry can't ignore sustainability anymore and the issue of climate change. So everything, business models, product creation, everything is moving to that direction with that in mind. We're seeing a beautiful new world of how to engage with fashion, whether it's buying from a better brand that is producing more sustainably, whether it's swapping, whether it's renting your clothes, whether it's thrifting. Here in Singapore, there are so many amazing companies that offer these services already, like the Fashion Pulpit for swapping, Style Theory for rental or Rentadella. There are lots of smaller thrift stores popping up. And no matter what your aesthetic, there is something that is out there. The more we can support such businesses, then the more of such businesses and business models will appear. And it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, supply and demand situation. I'm personally friends with a lot of sustainable fashion founders who are all working away to try and create change within the industry, help people consume and create more consciously. So that's already happening. And I think the future of fashion is going to be a lot more of that. And hopefully in the next couple of years, especially here in Singapore, we'll have more people who are engaging with such ways of transforming their relationship with fashion in this positive way, while still enjoying everything about fashion, you know, dressing up, looking nice, feeling good in an outfit. Like, we don't want sustainability to take away from that. And that's the kind of challenge that the fashion industry has to straddle, how to still make things inspiring, aesthetically attractive, convenient, but have this very strong sustainability and social impact engine at its core of a business model. So there's going to be more of that, which I think is exciting, and hopefully more consumers engaging, and hopefully more investment in such business models materials, because then they can really grow and thrive, from Singapore to spreading across Southeast Asia. If we look at the circular business model perspective, the industry can be far more sustainable than it is now. I think here in Singapore, we also need to address things like textile recycling. This is already being addressed in various areas, from, a top-down level and bottom-up level in the industry. But, textile recycling in itself is a challenge, but there's a lot of tech advancements and investment coming into those areas, which is going to help both Singapore as a country and how we manage our textile waste in general over the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to drastically improve the industry. Otherwise, the narrative right now, beyond creating more sustainable products and business models and, pushing those out, we're also moving towards an idea of how can we regenerate versus just sustaining. The word sustainability in deeper circles there's a tension around it, because it implies that we can sustain things, a state of which they are. In the industry right now, there's a lot of deep scientific research and brands who are engaging more towards the idea of how can fashion be regenerative versus just sustainable. So regenerative meaning, how can we help to improve the lives of people? How can we help to improve the land, soil regeneration, improving how we actually grow crops? How can we actually improve and give back to the land so that everything is still here and thriving for future generations, and therefore helps to mitigate the climate crisis at the same time because of how interconnected everything is. So there are a lot of really cool brands that are doing things, whether it's becoming more vertically integrated and owning their own production, and therefore controlling how they actually grow cotton or how they grow their raw materials in a better way. So there's a lot of this happening. And I think that narrative and engagement within the more regeneration conversation is going to increase over the next few years. So it's not just about mitigating and lessening impact. It's about how can we actually improve and regenerate what we've taken away. I think the conversation is going to be really switching to that in terms of the future of fashion. And of course, AI, tech, that's the last thing I would say. I think that a lot of people at the moment look to platforms like TikTok as a platform's really restructured power and influence, I think, and culture, and how we participate with media. What that has also meant is it's been a real growth engine for a lot of fast fashion brands. And I think that tech and AI will drastically change how we engage with fashion in the future. We're seeing more people creator-led commerce. So, everyday people who are becoming brands themselves and are selling things to people themselves. It's no longer mass media that influences culture in that way. It's actually everyday people like you and me who have a phone and a video and a point of view. That is going to shift how brands create and engage. And I think we might be moving away from, the very inventory heavy fashion system that we have now, where brands try and predict 6 to 12 months down the road what people are going to like, which is in the typical cycle, to actually looking at on-demand production. That's one thing that the brand beginning with S has done very well, is created that very tech AI enabled model of on-demand production. Even though it's a scary amount of overproduction still, and it is an issue, it is very smart. And I hope to see more brands and business models in the fashion industry adopting tech to grow further for a more positive influence.
Yeah, it's great to hear that consumers are being more aware, and this is one of the driving factors that is pushing the industry towards a more sustainable future. And it's also good to hear that there are more initiatives and community-led initiatives in the sustainable fashion space in Singapore. So fashion is something I'm sure the audience as consumers can all relate to, and some also struggle with when they try to embark on a more sustainable journey, especially when they're fed with a lot of, like you said, fast fashion trends, new seasons, flash sales. One challenge is that sustainable clothing items often come at a premium price, and naturally so because of high quality materials, better paid wages, more ethical practices. So some consumers on a budget, they practice mindful shopping and they go for secondhand or vintage clothing items. So other than this, what are some other tips you have for more environmentally conscious shoppers that are on a budget?
Yeah, it's a great question. To me, sustainable fashion is not the product. Sustainable fashion is about cultivating a more sustainable, healthy, and meaningful relationship with our clothes, full stop. So whatever that looks like to you is applicable. I think that for starters, I want to say that engaging with the sustainable fashion movement can look like so many things. And what we spend on clothes is deeply personal. It might be affected by our socioeconomic status and our background, and it might be affected by so many different things, where you live in the world. You know, there's all sorts of different reasons and that people spend or choose to spend different things, different amounts on clothes. So number one, acknowledging it's deeply personal and there's no right or wrong in that respect on what you choose to spend on fashion. It's personal to you and that's absolutely okay. Number two, if you want to be a more sustainable fashion or consumer or make better choices, there are so many ways you can do that beyond just buying from a brand that is producing in a more sustainable way. You can choose to do so. And there are many brands that are producing that cost the same amount as actually a lot of fast fashion brands now, not the one beginning with S, because that is just a new definition of low cost, but comparable to many of the ones that you can walk around and go into in a lot of Singapore's major malls. You can find a lot of them on our platform, on various different places, their own websites now as well. Beyond that, you can choose to swap, you can choose to thrift, you can choose to rent, you can choose to upcycle, you can choose to repair your clothes. Ultimately, slow down your consumption and buy less. That is one of the most sustainable things that you can do. And I also think that in terms of improving our relationship with stuff in general, it really starts from what you already own. That is really the mindset shift that we all need to be more sustainable fashion consumers. And then it's the action and how you engage. So it comes kind of from the inside out. I don't mean that to sound like very woo-woo or, you know, super up there. I mean it from a place of quite practically, it's kind of a psychology thing of, okay, so this is how I've consumed in the past, and this is how I perceive like how I want to look. This is what my wardrobe looks like. Maybe a lot of us buy things that we don't need. We buy unnecessarily. Sometimes we buy emotionally. Sometimes we buy to fill a hole or fill a gap because of something else that's happening in our lives, or because we want to look like this celeb we've seen on TikTok or this influencer on Instagram. But actually, it's not really us. I think it's about creating a more sustainable wardrobe. Being a more conscious fashion consumer starts with really getting to know yourself better, what you already own, and learning to understand your style, what you really like. Filter away all the rubbish and all the noise of social media and the world's influence and say, hey, okay, this is me. That takes time, but growing in that confidence means that you automatically filter out a lot of things that are just not for you. And then if you want to then bring something new into your life, you can say, hey, okay, well, what is this to me? Is this an investment piece? Is this something that I want to own for years? Okay, maybe I'll allocate a little bit more to these great jeans that I really want. And okay, actually, I want to try out this trend, but I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll go to the swap shop and I'll see, oh, okay, can I find something? I want to try this color, but I'm not sure if it's for me. I'll swap it. And then if I don't like it, I can swap it back rather than create fashion waste. So I think you can become smart about how you, number one, choose to spend your hard-earned money. And number two, you can do it in a way that naturally becomes a habit to do in a more sustainable way. And as someone who has been through this, and as someone who has, seen a community of hundreds, thousands of women in Singapore engaging with fashion in a more sustainable way, it just starts with a step. Taking those steps to thinking a little bit differently. And all of the options are already out there. Sure, we need more of them, but there are so many different ways. And knowing that it's not about going and buying a whole new wardrobe of more sustainably made garments. It's also not about throwing out what you already own if you own fast fashion. That's not the case. You could own a fast fashion garment that you've had since you were like 17 and you still wear it. And that's great. That is a sustainable choice for you. If you're wearing and loving something for years, great. It doesn't matter where it came from, but in the future, you can be more mindful of where things come from. It's about that rather than seeing things as a restrictive, because engaging with sustainable fashion doesn't have to be and isn't restrictive. I think it can be restrictive for people of larger sizes. There's not enough size inclusivity within sustainable fashion spaces, whether that's first or secondhand at the moment. That is changing. Even for modest wear, there aren't enough options. That is changing, whether it's brands who are starting to produce wider size ranges or more options, or whether it's thrift or secondhand stores that are trying to curate better. It's changes happening, but I would say that it's not as easy for some people. And all of that is definitely changing. So that's a positive thing too.
Thanks, Susannah. I think those are really, really good perspectives and really good tips for the audience in terms of how to cultivate a more meaningful relationship with our existing clothes. So thank you so much for taking the time and for this really inspiring conversation. I personally have many great takeaways, and I'm sure the audience will feel the same. And I also can't wait to see Zerrin's future developments as well as where the fashion industry will go, hopefully into a more sustainable future.
Thank you.
you.